starting. There we go. This hangout is on the air live, it says, and so it is. I've got George Mason University coach Jay Hosack. If he wasn't the national coach of the year, he darn well could have been. Jay's showing. Go ahead, Jay. You got to say something when you do it. Do it again.
I'm just going to say this. It's first time in 28 years, so it's pretty special.
The EI.
Has Ferguson written a check yet?
Yeah, and hold on. I didn't introduce you yet, Fergie. And say that Jay should have been the national coach of the year. I don't know if you were, but you had a heck of a year. Bill Ferguson once was the national coach of the year. He is the former head coach at USC, and the reason both of these guys are here is because the Big West Conference dropped the big men's volleyball bomb yesterday. It's pretty cool because they're adding men's volleyball, the first Division I conference to do it, 6 teams, and the impact on men's volleyball nationwide and, of course, to the MPSF is huge. And, Fergie, let's start with you since you're right on top of it and you talked to a lot of guys yesterday.
Yeah, first of all, everybody is thrilled from just about every walk of volleyball I could talk to. And I think the biggest thing is having the first major Division I conference to sponsor men's volleyball is, it's a landmark deal. I don't want to say legitimizes it because it's such a great sport and there's so many wonderful people involved in it, but boy, does it really move the meter as far as is locking in. There's now 6 teams, and the talk every year about men's volleyball is, are we adding or heaven forbid, are we subtracting? You now have 6 teams in a conference that cannot be dropped.
Yeah, let me note who those are. That's Cal State Northridge, Long Beach, UC Irvine, UC Santa Barbara, Hawaii, and then eventually UC San Diego as it moves up to Division I. And Jay Hosack, who wrote a column for this website, DestinationVolleyball.com, just a little more than 2 weeks ago, you said this was going to happen, Jay, and you were wondering at the time when you wrote it what kind of fallout there might be, but obviously it's the opposite of fallout.
Yeah, I wasn't exactly being a fortune teller. I don't think it was hidden news that was really under the radar. I think everybody knew that it was going to happen. It was just a question of, was it going to happen quicker or was it going to take a little longer to get done? And so, the people I've been talking to are all extremely excited about it as well. I don't think there's a bad thing that happens from this. I think the real question will be, which Bill talked about earlier, is does the NCAA all of a sudden immediately open it up to 8 teams and have that regional quarterfinal match, so to speak, before everything happens, or are they going to keep it at 6 and only have 1 at large? And I'd be really hard-pressed to see them keep it at 6. I think the 8 framework was set up a couple years ago when they opened it up to 6. I think it's just easier. It makes more sense. But you never know with the NCAA.
Yeah, and if somebody's just not totally aware, there's 4 at-large bids currently, and 4 conference automatic bids, and then 2 at-large. The MPSF, the EIVA. Did we happen to mention that George Mason won that bid this year? The MIVA, and then of course Conference Carolinas. Well, those 4 would still get bids, and then a 5th now, the Big West Conference. It's impossible to believe there would only be 1 at-large bid with that type of competition in those leagues. And so the NCAA, which is doing the NCAA tournament by the seat of its pants every year anyway, they didn't even announce until the week of whether the 2 play-in matches were going to be at Penn State, where the semifinals and final were, or if they were going to be somewhere else. So I would think they would certainly be able to maintain the flexibility. Wouldn't you think, Bill?
Yeah, well, like you said, the way is already paved for them to go to 8. It seems that in men's volleyball, any kind of growth is a chicken or the egg kind of situation, and we've talked about it for years in the MPSF boardrooms, and I'm sure in the EIVI, MIVA, and now Conference of Carolinas, that is expansion going to be driven by growth in the sport? And we finally have some growth. I think before it was driven by logic and how can we do this and make sense from a budget standpoint. Now we actually have what seems to be some permanent growth. Now, we did survive with 1 at-large bid for years. Not that I'm saying it's the greatest thing or we should ever strive for that, but I would assume, and we all know what that letter, what that word starts with, but I think that my gauge and my dealings in my time coaching men's volleyball, the NCAA, is it's going to take about a year or two for everybody to wrap their head around, oh my gosh, this is what we've got going. It's not going to come into play until 2018. So the men's volleyball season is going to play as it has been this next coming year, and then beyond that is when you're going to see the Big West have its tournament, and you'll have 5 automatic qualifiers for the NCAA tournaments.
Yeah.
The
Jay just the camera switched because Jay coughed, and Jay and I are having a contest to see who's got the worst cold. But Fergie, let me ask you. I know yesterday you and I talked about doing this. All right, whoever has their cell phone on gets demerit points. Fergie, you and I talked yesterday about when this broke. You said you'd already been on the phone. I think you said you talked to John Costi at Stanford and to Charlie Wade out at Hawaii and a couple other places. What kind of feedback did you get from talking to those guys?
They're all thrilled. I didn't know what the MPSF stand. I don't know where the stance from the MPSF was going to come from, but talking to Costi, I think it's pretty unanimous that they like the growth of the sport. Period. Here's the one hidden thing: is now this whole this split. If you want to call it a split or you want to call it growth, whatever you want. You're now going to have the opportunity to have some scheduling openings, okay, which I think is going to be the biggest thing. There's 2 points to what I'm going to make here. For years, Pete Hansen, Mark Pavlik, and myself tried to do a Pac-12 Big Ten tournament, and we never could do it because there was never any space in our schedules, and more driven by the MPSF teams because we had to play 22 conference matches at points. So there was 0 openings, and then trying to fit that in with schools that either were on semester or quarter. You always had different academic schedules, so nobody could ever produce these tournaments that produce growth or national interest. And now we're going to be able to do that. You're going to have a lower number of teams within your own conference. Let's just assume for ease's sake that the Big West and the MPSF will play themselves twice, and then the other conference once. And now they'll still have room to go play George Mason, to go play Penn State or Ohio State if they choose, if their budgets warrant it. The other thing it's going to do with that scheduling flexibility, the teams that maybe don't have a big enough budget, they don't have to travel as much. They don't have to play. They can. You get maybe a San Diego that's going to be able to get a couple teams that are going to come in from the East or the Midwest and maybe play Irvine and then can swing down to San Diego. So you're going to have San Diego benefit from it. There's a whole lot there. And now you're talking about, being in the MPSF for the time I was, anytime you talked about growth, we would just all retch because we couldn't even schedule our own conference and have any weeks off or any weeks to schedule anybody else. And now you're going to have the possibility of Concordia coming into the MPSF here in the next couple of years. Now you're going to have the possibility of Grand Canyon moving over. So for the first time, you now have the Big West has their own conference and their own AQ, and now you have the MPSF talking about conference growth. So if you think about those two things on the big scale, that's I use the term moving the meter, and that's, I couldn't be happier for the sport.
Yeah, Jay, we talk mostly, of course, about impact on the West Coast, but on the East Coast, where you're in the EIVA and then the MIVA, you guys all have the advantages of being so close, but it's a big upside for what you guys can do, too. And then, also, Jay, you have to think that maybe someone else on the East Coast or in the Midwest might be thinking along the same lines.
Well, that's a twofold answer. So the reality is that a lot of teams from the East Coast, obviously it's freezing cold and it's snowing and they want to go somewhere warm. And, the outrigger was a great way to go for some teams, and going to UC Santa Barbara to their tournament in January was nice. But the reality is a lot of those teams during their spring breaks would travel out west. And it was a real easy go for the West Coast teams because they didn't have to go anywhere and they get to have a couple of teams, whoever they were, come in. Now that possibility is open even more because in the past, if you had, let's say, a Penn State or a Ohio State that wanted to go out west, they would get scheduled pretty quickly because, who wouldn't want to have those teams in your gym? But now, and those took up 2 more dates. Bill touched upon it. If you had 22 dates already taken up at your conference and then you did another elephant bar in the beginning of the year. Now you've only got 4 dates open. It's really tough to be able to schedule anybody else to come in. Well, now you have all these open dates, and now teams like Mason and teams like Princeton and teams like Sacred Heart, now there's no real roadblock to stop them from being able to schedule them, because now their schedules are wide open. The only thing now will be whether or not they're going out somewhere and playing somebody else. So I think that's going to help out a great amount. You know, I think there's some movement out here from some universities as well that we're looking real positive at. And I think, you know, this was, you know, with UC San Diego going Division I, that was the big first domino to happen. I think they would have gotten invited into the Big West had they not. But now that that happened, now that the Big West is adding this, I think Bill touched on it. The next question is, does Grand Canyon leave the MIVA and go into the MPSF? Because they want to be considered a big-time athletic program, and that could be a natural fit for them. And does the rest of that conference to Pac-12, do they start seeking out Arizona's and Arizona State's to be able to join in?
That'd be awesome. You guys are great. Oh, go ahead, Bill.
Positive financial impact there, too, because geographically Grand Canyon is so far away from the MIVA schools. The MIVA schools are going to save some money on travel budget. Grand Canyon's going to save some money on travel budget as well. So not only are you providing, you know, the NC2A is all about being, you know, competitive. It's all about the student-athlete experience, and that enhances the student-athlete experience, and it's promoting, you know, fiscal responsibility. So you're hitting 3 pretty major deals there, which is going to make the situation better all the way around.
And fiscal responsibility is why we do this by video chat instead of me coming out there and seeing both of you guys in person. Jay Hosack, he's the coach of George Mason University. Bill Ferguson, the former USC men's coach, who was well suited for this subject, but now an assistant coach at Cal State LA and having the time of his life. Gentlemen, you're great, and thank you very much.
Thanks, you. Guys. Wave pool, Jay. Wave pool.
Yes, wave pool. I'll meet you in Fresno. I never thought I'd say that in my life.
Exactly.